ready to go. Okay. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on day 3. We know that the slot right after lunch of a 3-day conference is not always the most lively one. So we hope to do what we can to get you out of your chairs and keep you engaged and hopefully teach you about this new campaign we're running. But first I want to mention that if you want to ask questions, of course, feel free to raise your hand. We can do that. But there's another way. If you're not the kind of person who wants to raise your hand, you can use Slido and use the URL above to submit your question. So I'm joined today by 3 other excellent panelists so that we can help tell you about our new campaign, which is called the Keep It On campaign. And I'll just wait a moment for the PowerPoint to start up. But I'm here with Chinmay Arun from the National Law University of Delhi, Peter Misek, who's our global counsel, legal counsel at Access Now and Policy Council, and Kelly Daniel from iFreedom Uganda. And I'll let them each introduce themselves a little bit more as the time goes on. So today, as we mentioned, we're launching our campaign, our international campaign, our global campaign to fight internet shutdowns. It's a trend we've seen worldwide, and just to make it very relevant, some of us woke up today to this headline that North Korea ordered an internet shutdown. So in case you were thinking this is something that hasn't happened for a long time, it happened today. And what we're going to do today is we'll give an overview, relying on the experts in the room, and then the next piece, depending on the mood, see how people feel, if they want to, we have a really cool interactive role play where you can experience an internet shutdown. You play the role of one of the major actors in shutdowns. We'll explain that. And you can try to find a solution. What would you do? We'll talk about some of those solutions. And then at 4 o'clock, and I'll just mention this now, we are going to be creating an international definition of internet shutdowns. We've already crowdsourced them from experts around the world. And at 4, we're going to meet in one of the partitioned rooms inside this room to try to come to a solution and then upload it on Wikipedia. It'll be the first international definition of shutdowns on Wikipedia. Right now, if you go to Wikipedia and you type in internet shutdown, it says see internet, which is not that helpful. So we think we can do better and call attention to this problem. And I'll just tell you now, there are things you can do to help if you only have a few minutes. You can sign up for our campaign. We're going to pass around a clipboard. You can help us with our definition, as I mentioned. You can do the role play. And we've got a resource page that we've created on Access Now. And that's just accessnow.org/internet-shutdowns. So those are some things you can do. I'll remind you of those in a minute. And with that, I'll kick it to Peter, who can give you a nice overview of the challenges we're facing, this very real problem.
Thanks, Teji. And first of all, I prefer to think of myself as a sessionista rather than a panelist. Yeah, I'm glad to talk about this problem. I think there are some difficulties, though, in that there are more internet shutdowns than we know about. The ones that we've heard of, that we see in headlines, are the exception, I think, rather than the norm. So this problem dates back on the internet at least as far back as 2007, when Myanmar shut down access to the internet. But of course, I think the seminal moment that we remember was Egypt in January 2011. So that's when the government went to the executives and the offices of 3 of the telcos operating in the country forced them to shut down the internet and mobile networks, and also forced them to send pro-government propaganda by SMS. So this took the world by storm, and it opened up our eyes to the possibility of a kill switch. And this possibility had very real repercussions, and namely sending more people onto the streets to protest that regime, which didn't last 3 weeks past that event. Another response, longer term, to that shutdown was the creation of more collaborative forum for civil society and the private sector, namely telcos, to discuss these and more challenges that sector faces on human rights. So this was a vulnerability that was exploited by a motivated regime in its death throes, and we got together the telcos to patch that vulnerability, and that's kind of the path that we're still on today. However, that is not the end of the history of the internet shutdown. Rather, it kind of went into hiding a bit and took a more insidious form we saw in Sudan in late 2013 when the government ordered telcos to shut down networks at the height of a public protest movement in Khartoum. And once those networks were shut down, the government brutally repressed, arresting more than 700 individuals and killing scores. We don't know how many people died in that repression, partly because of the difficulty of getting information out of the country at the time. So this is one of those shutdowns that looks a bit more modern in that it was very effective, operated largely under the radar, and that country's opposition movement has not reached that same peak of resistance since. It's not a pretty picture. There was one telco that we spoke with directly involved in that, whose CEO pushed back and says he lost his job as a result of that about a month later. It's Sudatel and one other telco that did work with us in the aftermath of that shutdown. Moving to one more that I want to highlight, June 2014 in the Central African Republic, we finally, I think, operationalized this vulnerability patching system that we had set up, where the telcos alerted us of a request to shut down mobile networks and SMS, and we advised those telcos. Those telcos took the advice, used a number of tools at their disposal, organized with their peer companies, and pushed back to effectively tell the government no more. And they were able to bring those networks back online. So those are some of the early examples, and I think we'll hear more. But we are trying to systematize the learnings and invite you all in to our campaign in order to end this worst practice.
Thank you, Peter. And we'll move now to talk with Chinmay, who can speak about experience in India from a legal and policy perspective, and if you'd like, about other countries in the region. Chinmay?
Thank you. So I was in a session yesterday in which we were discussing this upcoming campaign, and I was telling these guys how we write the Freedom on the Net report every year, and part of that involves counting the number of times internet shutdowns take place in India. And so last year, around mid last year, when our reporting period ended, India was in a great place. We had less than the usual number, which is, it's normally 2 or sometimes 3 per year, and typically more in regions in which there's conflict is sort of in a state of emergency most of the time. The laws stayed exactly the same. There was no change in laws, but between August and October last year, we suddenly had 6 internet shutdowns in a state that is actually mainland India. It's not a particularly war-torn region. And we had 2 more in other states, just in that short period. And so I think that the learning from this is that even if you're from a country in which this isn't happening right now, it's worth getting into this campaign, looking at your legal system, and seeing whether there's any possibility for abuse, because our legal system stayed exactly the same, but executive action changed. And some of the reasons for which these shutdowns took place are, I'm still getting over them. One of the shutdowns took place because there was an exam going on, and they felt that the copying might lead to public disorder. And so this is like, as you can see, and I'm not making this up. I wish I were. So the learning for this, from all of this for us, was that if you have broadly worded law, it means that there might come a time when it's abused, and this is happening right now in India. Lawyers have attempted to challenge this. They've taken this to the courts, and their ask right now is that don't word your exception so broadly that the government can go to any sort of small court and get an order for an internet shutdown. But it's been a little hard convincing the courts that this is necessary. So it's been a work in progress. And right now the government is still shutting down the internet with what I would call chilling regularity. Not through the country, but in states.
Great, thank you. I wanted to now share or introduce you to Kelly Daniel, who's with iFreedom Uganda, and we saw a really pernicious shutdown recently during the elections in Uganda. And Kelly, do you want to speak about that experience and introduce iFreedom Uganda for people who may not be familiar with you?
Thank you, Dej. So, iFreedom Uganda Network is an organization that supports and promotes freedom of expression, association, and assembly online through technical IT support, research and development of tools and applications that enhance digital security and safety, and remain a focus on the LGBT community and sex workers community in Uganda. But we also extend services to other human rights organizations and human rights defenders who come to our door seeking for these services. So on the eve of the election day, which was 18th February, government ordered shutdown of Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp, and also they shut down mobile money transactions, and they also further shut down ATMs. You couldn't get money from the ATMs, so credit cards were useless. No money on mobile. And then the shutdown went on for 2 days from the 18th, and then it was also on the 19th because elections were extended. So all this was done in the government told us that it is a matter of national security. That they're shutting down Facebook and social media. But again, citizen is never just we didn't take it in, so people turned on to VPNs. Personally, where I come from, iFreedom, we made shortened URLs to VPNs that we were saturating on text messages and emails which are not broke. So people came back online, and then it was a very big debate during that day. And I suppose that day we had the biggest number of Twitter users on the others, in one single day because of the VPNs. So several days later, the Minister of ICT came up and owned up to the shutdown in a public statement and also apologized to the public. And they promised that this will never happen again, to complete a shutdown social media and everything. But again, some legislators continue to make very worrying statements. I want to read one for you from Margaret Mugisha, a new MP from Buraya County. She made a statement after the ministry made a public statement. On the 6th of March, she said, I pray that social media is closed again and forever. It's getting out of hand when people wake up and all they do is abuse and post derogatory stuff about people they don't even know. So what she calls derogatory stuff, or what she calls abuse, is for citizens to wake up and demand accountability on their vote. They demand for the release of Besigye, who is still under house arrest. They demand for political accountability. This is what government cannot take in, and this is the reason why they keep on shutting down social media and making it very hard for citizens to participate in all these democratic processes. And again, we shouldn't be blind that this is the first time government is doing this, but this is the first time that actually government came up through the UCC and owned up to what they were doing. So this time they announced, but there have been interruption of social media before. For example, during the Walk to Work campaign we had several years ago, mobile Facebook was turned off for some hours, and then prior to that also, Facebook was also shut down in another riot when the Kabaka of Uganda wanted to visit one of reason and it was stopped. So there have been all these incidents which are not documented and which the government doesn't own to. But this time, at least, they owned up to whatever they've done, on the 18th. But one good thing came out of, the 18th social media shutdown. And now, majority of Ugandans at least have a feel of what it means to connect secure on the internet. A feel of what it means to be able to use VPNs. And I am glad that politicians in the opposition are now encouraging their supporters to adopt, to secure communication is online and encryption, and also to learn ways of how to circumvent government surveillance, which we, by the way, anticipate is going to continue anytime soon, given the court ruling we had yesterday. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kelly. We're hearing, Peter, would you mind just talking about some of the impacts and just kind of summarizing what we've seen, and then I'll mention what we're doing with the campaign, and then we can open up for questions for the panelists.
Yeah, the impacts, you really have to use your imagination, and you probably even still can't think of all the different ways that losing connectivity, suddenly at a moment of conflict, of even crisis, of natural disaster sometimes can cause. The costs are economic, they're social, they're political, and they're financial. We have heard egregious cases yesterday in a session on Pakistan, which suffers systemic and a pattern of, to check out IHRB's new paper on this topic, but I also encourage you to help document the costs of network shutdowns. What we look at economically is, as I think we heard from Kelly, those direct costs of not being able to access mobile money, make electronic transactions. Banks themselves depend on connections to the global internet in order to facilitate transactions. The internet economy suffers when the internet is unstable. And development writ large and on a microeconomic level are both impacted by these shutdowns. We need to quantify those costs and make that case. Beyond economics, mobile health, e-health is crucially important, especially in rural areas. These are, again, things that impact people's daily lives without this connectivity. The political consequences are perhaps what we think of most directly. Mubarak is one case where the shutdown created a backlash that toppled the regime. That is the exception. These shutdowns are spreading as a worst practice because they are effective tools for regimes that would abuse human rights in order to increase their longevity. So those political consequences are irreversible, especially when these occur during elections. And then, the human rights, the civil and political rights impacts not just your ability to communicate, but your ability to access information is blocked. Yeah, I think we can go.
Thank you. So again, looking around the room, I know there's some real experts on this, so we'll just briefly describe the campaign and what we're going to try to do to fight back. First of all, we need to raise awareness about this problem. Peter mentioned Pakistan. Our partners at Bytes for All, there was a shutdown on Monday and Tuesday. I mean, this is a very real thing, telling people the frequency, the impacts, but that there are also ways to fight back. We're basically aiming for the top. We think that the UN and intergovernmental bodies can make huge statements, but that's not the only place. We also think regional bodies like the African Union and the Organization of American States can make a big impact. And then at the country level, there are ways to effect change there too. So we're going to be doing a broad-based campaign. Tactically, we're going to be moving where we're most effective. Chinmay, I will have a question for you about because there is a law case in India. Would you mind just mentioning that briefly? Because that is a tactic that I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think we're okay. The case that we're trying to make, as in lawyers that are in another session right now are trying to make, but our lawmakers are not following that law. What they're doing is they're going with the Criminal Procedure Code, which has the sort of this very broad-ranging power that permits states to take action basically whenever there's a public order or a riot problem. And the thing with that is that they're able to go to, to a magistrate and get an order for an internet shutdown, and the magistrate is not really equipped to understand what is going on and whether a full internet shutdown is really necessary under these circumstances. So the case that we're trying to make is basically to narrow this. It's really difficult to convince governments to never have internet shutdowns, but we feel like if we can make sure that they do it very sparingly and that there's some accountability, that would help.
Thank you. Yeah, and we want to just mention at Access, we're fortunate to have our 24-hour digital security helpline, and we often are alerted to some of these disconnections through that mechanism, and we've developed a rapid response plan so that reactively, when they happen, we can do our best to get people online, make sure that they're safe and they're communicating securely. But this campaign is a proactive strategy. So we do need more research. We need more information about what's happening. We need more information, as Peter mentioned, about the economic costs. We need more information about where the blocking is happening on the network. And we're working with organizations like Measurement Lab. We're talking to folks at Uniprobe and private sector companies like Dyn that have really great probes on the network. So there's just a lot of work to be done to document this phenomenon, and we would love your help. We've got a clipboard, and you can really make a difference. So we will open it up to questions now before we break for the interactive role play. So if you have a question, you can use Slido, or you can just raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Yeah, you can shout it. We'll repeat the question. Yeah. So the question is, have we considered funding sort of circumvention or mesh technologies that would allow you to help push back against shutdowns? Peter, do you want?
Funding, Access does have a new grants program, which we should say is something that we are happy to discuss with everyone. There has been a lot of attention to resilience and to circumvention technologies, and we certainly encourage that to take place. What we are pushing for, I think, primarily is a new norm that shutting down networks is not acceptable practice. Short of that, though, and I think we've heard about how effective VPNs can be, and we certainly push users towards those tools that can help circumvent and get their messages out. So, whether it's private sector companies like Twitter rolling out sort of workarounds in these situations, whether it's users flocking to new tools as I think it happened in Hong Kong, or whether it's having those kind of resilient and mesh and sort of intranet networks in place before this sort of thing happens. We support more research and more development and more attention to how those networks and tools can be used securely and openly and effectively.
And I mean, maybe we could just ask Kelly, were people using mesh networking during the Uganda shutdown? What tools were you mentioned, the virtual private networks?
Yeah, so there were a couple of tools people were using. People were using Betternet, were using Siphon, Tor, Thunderbird, CyberGhost. A couple of tools, but I think the tool which was used most was Siphon. It's one particular VPN that was, downloaded more than the rest of the tools, and that's what we're using to communicate.
Great, thank you. And if you want to see what it might be like, we'll take maybe 2 more questions, but then I think we should break for the role play because you can decide whether you use a mesh network in the role play. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. And what we're going to do is ask you to get into groups of 6. It's a fun interactive role play. We're going to come around and we're going to simulate a shutdown and then reconvene afterwards. So there are two main things we want to understand from the role play. After you simulate the shutdown in your group, were you able, so I'm scaring some people. Some people don't want to do interactive role plays, which I totally understand, but there are enough of you here where I think we can have a good one. So the two questions, are you going to turn the internet back on? Does your group reach a solution based on the fact pattern that we shared? So that's one of the, and then the other one is, what other creative solutions did you come up with? So we'll break now, and the tables are perfect. It's the perfect size. So if you could just gather in groups of 6, and we'll distribute the information to the groups. Thanks to the panelists. I want to mention, because not all of them can stay with us, but thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks, Chinmay. Thank you, Kelly. If you're Access staff, if you could help us get folks organized into groups of 6, really appreciate that. Thank you. So there's some question here. I just want to explain. You don't need to tell people who you are. You can. So what you're trying to do in this exercise is achieve the goals that are written down for your particular role. So you can share as much information as you want, but you don't need to necessarily tell people who you are. You can, but what you're trying to do is achieve those bullet points. So it's a negotiation.